Well, thanks so much for being here today, Brian. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me,
Um,
Jeremy.
Maybe I should say Dr. Anderson, depending on which hat you want to wear.
You call me Brian.
Can you, I guess, to start, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and then a little bit about Chai as an
Yeah.
organization?
So, physician data scientist by training, practiced clinically, trained clinically here in the greater Boston area in primary care, and then practiced north of here for about 8 years. Um, it was an interesting experience. Part of my practice was working at a federally qualified health center, which FQHCs, if you know them, they don't have as many resources as an MGH might have. And part of my experience there was challenged by the implementation of some of the electronic health records that we had
Sure.
and the time that it takes to document and spend staring at a computer screen. And it was really challenging for me as a practicing clinician to get home on time to spend time with my family. And candidly, I got a little bit burnt out. And so pivoting from clinical practice, pivoted to work at a company called Athena Health, which at the time was a startup. And so really went into the space of wanting to make the technology better for clinicians.
Yeah.
And then from there, one door opened up to another. I ended up working at a company called Kairos, and then worked at a company called MITRE, which does a lot of work with the U.S. government. And in that capacity, I was the chief digital health physician, and so led a number of strategic efforts in the digital health space, working with the U.S. government. It's in that space that I was asked to help lead a lot of the data analytic efforts in the pandemic for the White House COVID task force, focusing on vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, some of the therapies we had.
Right.
And it was during that time that you had really non-traditional companies coming together. You had like a Microsoft and a Google and an Amazon. You had health systems that were inherently competitive, pharma companies that were inherently competitive, and we were doing a lot of good work.
Any unique window when everybody's aligned.
Exactly. And I think it was in that unique period that we asked, wow, we're doing a lot. Can we do something more in a different space? And we looked at AI, and that was the genesis of Chai. March 2021, we committed to bringing our resources together to launch Chai, and the focus of Chai has always been, how do we bring groups together to build a set of consensus-driven best practices in responsible health AI.
So there's two things that are important, and I want to touch on both. Let's start with your coalition, because I think a big part of what attracts attention across the industry, and with good reason, is this incredible coalition that you've built. And it's unusual to have a collection of leading health systems and academic medical centers and all the rest coming to the table together with all of the tech giants that you just mentioned, as well as startups and smaller health systems. So tell us, I guess, a little bit about these stakeholders and what you think is bringing them to the table to be involved with Chai and what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, no, great question. So when we started in March of 21, it was 8 doctors from health systems and 2 tech companies. So it was fundamentally a private sector led effort. And very quickly, it grew from there. I did not appreciate the appetite that so many stakeholders in this space had about wanting to come up with consensus definitions about what good, responsible AI looked like. And so, yeah, I mean, yes, we have all of the name brand recognized big companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, and we have the big AMCs like Mayo and Stanford and Duke and Johns Hopkins. But the coalition quickly grew to include over now like 3,000 organizations that are part of our coalition. 25% of those are startups. And so it's very clear that it's not just the entrenched incumbents that are interested in developing these common definitions, but it's very much, software developers at startups wanting to come together and come to consensus on what the technical specifications look like on how do we think about fairness, how do we think about transparency, how do we think about effectiveness and safety in responsible health AI. Those kinds of best practices can allow a startup to accelerate and grow when you have a common definition of what responsible AI looks like, and developers are developing them, and that same definition is agreed to by their customers. be it a big health system or a small health system. That allows the kind of innovation and growth in the use of AI in safe and effective ways to really scale and go much faster than if you didn't have that kind of common agreement about what the target of responsible AI looks like. So we're really excited. The other important stakeholder that we have are, of course, patient community advocates. And so, very quickly, as we've grown, certainly with the tech companies and with the health systems, is ensuring that every one of our working groups that includes those stakeholders has patient community advocates. The other really exciting thing about CHAI, yes, it's private sector led, but we quickly got interest from the public sector. So at the federal level, when I think many in HHS saw the work that we were doing in responsible, ethical, safe, and effective AI, wanted to participate in that. And I think that's really become part of the magic of CHAI, is you have these innovators from startups to big tech, big health systems to small health systems, working together in an innovative way to come up with these definitions, informing the policymakers and the regulators at the public sector side. And it's very much a synergistic process, right? You do not want regulations that are uninformed about where the private sector innovators are going, where the new use cases are being developed.
Sure.
And you don't want the innovators developing these use cases being uninformed about where the regulators might be developing these frameworks. So it's that kind of synergistic approach that has come to be our calling card in CHAI.
What have you done to establish that? First of all, to the extent that we're excited, it is unique and interesting and somewhat novel that we have the idea of a, admittedly partially, but private sector organization setting standards for an industry, right? That's typically something that we rely on the government and regulators to do.
Yeah.
But what have you done to set CHAI apart and sort of indicate to the federal government and state governments, as you're talking to them, that they can trust you guys?
So it's a great question. So on the standards part, AI is such a new space, particularly generative AI. Traditional AI, yes, it's been around, since the 70s, but the use cases and the, use of it in very consequential spaces in health is new. So one of the unique differentiating things about CHAI is the technical depth by which we're taking our working groups. It's not at a 50,000 foot level where we all sort of agree, yes, we want fairness, yes, we want transparency. It's, okay, software developers, what does that actually look like?
Right.
And so step one is coming up with that technical level of specificity about what good, transparency, fairness, whatever the responsible AI principle is, taking it from 50,000 foot down to where the rubber hits the road. The important, distinction I would make between what CHAI is doing and what standards development organizations are doing, which do work really closely with the U.S. government, is CHAI right now is focused on developing these frameworks. Now, these frameworks will ultimately become standards at some point. But that standard development process, because it works so closely with organizations within the U.S. government, it takes time. It can take between 1 to 3 years to develop a single standard. And so part of what we're doing in CHAI is trying to move at the speed of the innovators. And so focusing more on developing these best practice frameworks and not going through the formal process of the standards development organization. In parallel to the framework development, we are also working with standards development organizations like HL7, like ISO. Quite a few organizations out there that are very interested in partnering with CHAI, like CTA, to be able to develop formal standards.
And that are known, right?
And that are known.
Familiar to folks in Washington and elsewhere.
Exactly. I think part of the excitement is, how do we, to the second part of your question, how do we do this in a way that's trustworthy? And so part of that, our strategy in that is doing it in as transparent a way as we can. I mentioned CHAI has a lot of members. That's not the entire community in the health AI or digital health ecosystem. So what we do is we publish all of our things and we make them freely available to the community. And in the draft forms, that initial first draft of the publication that we make, we want to hear feedback from the entire community, from people that are not part of CHAI, from patient advocates, all across the nation, from other companies that aren't part of CHAI. We want to offer them an opportunity to give feedback. So we're committed to ensuring that the working groups that develop these technical frameworks publish them, and then we have an open comment period, very similar to how the federal government does their kind of rulemaking. It's 60, 90-day period. and then intentionally wanted to take that feedback in and then finalizing the draft technical documentation. The other part of building trust is CHAI is a nonprofit. We want to be seen as a convener and a facilitator to ensure that we're not driving any particular agenda in CHAI. We really want to bring together the innovators to facilitate the consensus process to build these technical documents, and that's the space that we want to occupy in CHAI.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about industry. And there was a SVB article recently that said that about 30% of investment in healthcare largely is in AI last year. There's still a lot of folks, given where we are in the zeitgeist, and that you can't, we were both at CES, you couldn't walk past anything without seeing, the term artificial intelligence in it. There are concerns about AI washing, but given your background as a physician, what are you really excited about right now on the clinical side?
To have the opportunity for a physician and a patient to more meaningfully engage so that the patient and the doctor can understand what the actual problem might be for that patient.
Yeah.
As an example, there's a lot of companies in the AI scribe space. Part of the reason I shared earlier that I transitioned out of medicine was because of the challenge of actually being able to connect with the patients that I had, because I had this clunky EHR that got in the way. Enabling doctors and nurses to more meaningfully connect with their patients is going to, hopefully address some of the significant burnout issues and staffing shortages that we have across the nation, both for nurses and for providers, and create hopefully a level of efficiency that will improve the kind of clinical care that patients experience. The knowledge that a lot of these AI models have in terms of diagnoses, therapeutic protocols that are potentially the right kind of therapy or the right kind of protocol for a patient, also enables a provider to have, at their fingertips, a co-pilot or a companion that would really help them potentially identify the right diagnosis, identify the right kind of treatment. There are so many stories out there already where you have a provider that's, perplexed about, what to do with the patient, and the patient takes their history, puts it into one of these frontier models, and then brings it back to the provider and realize, wow, that's the solution. Let me help solve it. One of my close friends had a kind of cancer, colorectal cancer, and he was seen by one of the most world-renowned oncologists out in California. Didn't know what to do. He took it, put it in, I think, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT told him, the rare form, here's the mutation, and here's a protocol that you should consider. It was just published in a journal, so the doctor didn't know. Took it back to the doctor. Doctor said, holy cow, wow, that's it. And now he's in remission. And so I think those are the kinds of real life stories that are going to begin to, I think, bring attention to how these kinds of tools can be used by providers and patients to really improve care. The other thing that really excites me is we have an access problem in healthcare, right? Partly because we don't have enough doctors and nurses, across the U.S., particularly in rural areas, inner city areas. AI has the power to meet patients where they are and help them connect into the healthcare system and really address their issues. And so I'm really excited about that as well. How can we meet patients where they are, if they're in rural environments, if they're inner city environments, and address their clinical needs?
That's really interesting. So you're a self-described tech geek. Like, we walked into the room and you were playing with cameras here and stuff. You're also a physician by training. As you're going down this road and on this journey, what are you finding that the tech industry needs to understand about traditional healthcare stakeholders, and conversely, what healthcare folks need to understand about tech?
Such a great question. One of the, I think, really unique things about health is that it is profoundly intimate and personal. We are all patients. We're all going to be caregivers. And the importance of understanding the unique individual needs and nuances of an individual, from their social determinants of health and the richness of their story, and how personal that is and how it affects their health, is, I think, a really important and unique attribute in the health space, as opposed to, if you think about fintech or other spaces where it's a little bit more abstracted and it's about numbers. In health, the importance of understanding an individual patient and an individual doctor is going to be, I think, really important and oftentimes overlooked. The other part is the consequentiality of it, right? So health obviously has life or death scenarios and uses of AI that could potentially help improve a clinical outcome. And so in those situations where the risks are high, and we think about as a technologist, one of the often used approaches is, move fast and break things,
Right.
and, develop a minimum viable product and test it. And if it breaks, then, iterate on that and improve on that. That's an approach that needs to be modulated when we're in the health space, because obviously you don't want things to break when a person's life's on the line. And so it's a challenge to innovate and move fast and do that in a way that takes into account all this rich complexity that is unique and personal to an individual, but yet delivering a real impact and a real result. And so oftentimes when I speak to innovators in the private sector space, it's important for them to recognize that partnership and collaboration, like real meaningful partnership and collaboration with physicians and nurses and their patients, in developing the kind of trust in how we use AI in these consequential spaces, is really important. Innovators, particularly in AI, if you're in it every day, don't appreciate that we have a really bad or really profound trust problem with AI. Survey after survey out there shows the majority of Americans don't trust AI. If you add a consequential space like health into that, they trust it even less. And so if we want to move fast and innovate, we have to develop the kinds of real collaborative partnerships with the stakeholders that are part of it. And that includes nurses, doctors, and patients. Now, what do the healthcare system need to learn from the technologists? Part of the brokenness in the healthcare ecosystem as it relates to technology is the siloing of so much of this and the misalignment of incentives. Now, those obviously, I think, need to be addressed at a policy level. But from a technologist's perspective, it's really important when you're partnering with the healthcare ecosystem to understand, one, that the incentives aren't aligned, but two, there's real challenge with healthcare systems always thinking about, well, we're unique. There's no one like us.
Their markets, maybe they're right.
That might be right, but the clinical workflows, yes, they're complex. Yes, they're challenging. A level of willingness to collaborate with the technology side of the stakeholder is really important. And oftentimes I see that kind of collaboration break down when the healthcare providers or nurses don't understand how to do that in a way that allows for that kind of innovation and iteration. There's oftentimes an approach like, well, it has to be perfect before I use it. And that's not how you innovate, right? And so it's that balance between how do you innovate and move fast and do it in a safe way so you're not breaking things, but do it in a way that you're actually going to, potentially disrupt something that might make a doctor or a nurse uncomfortable. And I think that's a real challenge for some of us from this space.
So it's mid-January 2025 right now, and it seems everyone is thinking about the upcoming change in administration. So at the risk of being the 1,200th person who's asked you about this month, how was Chai thinking about that upcoming change and in terms of continuity and the efforts that you've had underway in Washington, issues in the States? What's front of mind?
Yeah, so some really exciting, I think, opportunities are on the horizon. Chai, as I said when we started, fundamentally led by the private sector. Yes, the public sector, yes, the current administration, joined, and we have representatives from the FDA, ONC, NIH, VA, all participating in our working groups. But this is fundamentally a private sector-led effort where it's bipartisan in nature. Like, nobody wants an AI that's going to hurt someone, right? We all want AI that's fair, safe, and effective for all of us. And in the conversations that I've had, that my team has had, from the Hill Day that we had back in November to ongoing conversations we've had with leading senators and representatives from Congress, as well as at the state level, have all, I think, one of the things I've appreciated is their desire to enable or allow the private sector to have time to really develop these guidelines and guardrails, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think one of the more consistent things I've heard recently is, we don't want a top-down government approach where the government says, here's the regulation,
Right.
without it being informed by what is the private sector coming to consensus on. As an example, how do you measure bias in generative AI? I can tell you right now, we do not have consensus on there. And so if there were a regulation that came out, specifically with like, if you have bias, this is what's going to happen. One of the challenges we would in the private sector immediately say was like, well, we don't even know how to measure it. Like, how do you do that? And so the conversations and the feedback that I've gotten has been great. Private sector, go do your thing. Like, build this consensus, build these best practice frameworks, and we want to work alongside you. And yeah, as clarity comes, certainly, we'll develop the appropriate regulations. I've also heard, certainly don't want to build regulations that are going to stifle innovation. The other, I think, important part is how does this ecosystem self-regulate? How do you create those internal guardrails that ensure that kind of safety and efficacy in a space that's moving so fast? And part of that work that we've done has been launching things like the model cart, this AI nutrition label, or developing private sector specific uses of a quality assurance lab. And so these are, fundamentally grounded in a collaboration between the AI developer, the vendor, and the customer, right? And so what we are hearing in Chive very loudly from the customer side of this is, we want greater transparency into how these models are built. We want to be able to have a vendor take their model and have it tested by a quality assurance lab. We love the PowerPoint slides. PowerPoint slides are great, but to have the kind of trust that I was talking about earlier, having that independent entity that can validate a model's actual performance is a really powerful way of building trust and advancing a procurement process through to a final deal, right? Like, you don't want a vendor to be stuck in a pilot or in a bake-off. If the customer can get the kind of transparency through things like a nutrition label or the use of an external validation from a quality assurance lab, those are the things that we're identifying in Chai as ways that we can, internal to the private sector, develop these guidelines and guardrails. And the public sector at a federal level and a state level, I think that's a great idea, right? Like, how can we have the private sector begin to develop these kinds of approaches? And then, again, I never want to speak for a policy or a regulator, but they might be able to make use of those at the appropriate time. And so what I've been hearing from incoming administration officials is a strong willingness to partner with us in that, to support us, to give us the time and space to be able to do that. I'm really excited about that.
Not to give you a crystal ball, but if we're looking ahead to 2025, think about what we're excited about, what Chai is working on, what the possibilities are. What do you hope is going to be Chai's biggest win in 2025?
Two things. The first one is an effort that we'll be announcing in greater detail. I'm happy to share with you now. There's been a lot of talk about agentic AI, right? We were at CES. Everyone's talking about AI agents. AI agents essentially are agents that are operating in a semi-autonomous or autonomous way, whatever the context is.
Yeah.
In the health context, one of the exciting things that we're going to be focusing on is the ability for an individual, you and me, to have, a multiple number of AI agents that could be operating on our behalf, helping us, advocating for us, assisting us in navigating, a complex healthcare system. But the challenge is, right, coming back to what I said earlier, because health is so personal and individual, your values, your priorities might be different than mine, different than someone else's. And so how we build these AI agents in such a way that allow them to be aligned to your definition of human flourishing or your values as it relates to health is both critically important, but also really, really exciting. And so one of the things we're certainly seeing in 2025 is this, movement from a kind of single monolithic model that you have to go to the web to use, to
Yeah.
the potential of having agents that are on your phone,
Sure.
or on a personal device that you can take with you or have working in the background for you. And in the health domain, that has really profound implications. And so one of the things we're going to be launching in Chai is an effort to, how do we think about enabling developers to develop these kinds of models with that understanding of how do I adjust the model or tune the model in a way that allows it to be sensitive to your values, my values, your concept of
Culturally
human.
competent.
Exactly. In a way that serves all of us, in a way that is cognizant how your values might be different than mine. And when we do that, we have the opportunity to unlock a lot of specific use cases in the health domain that allow the kind of human flourishing I think that we all want. It's a pretty consequential space, so it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of consensus to develop what that framework is. So we're excited. We're going to be pulling in ethicists, spiritual leaders, philosophers, certainly a lot of technologists, doctors and nurses and patients to develop that kind of framework for evaluation. The other really big thing is the model card. And so, we've seen amazing adoption of this already. A number of startups have already begun partnering with us and building out the applied model card.
And quickly recap, just for folks who aren't in this day in, day out, what the model card is.
Yeah, sorry. So the Chai model card is essentially a nutrition label. You go to the store, you look at a box of cereal or a can of soup, you turn it around, and there's the nutrition label. It has kind of a high level description of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that sort of thing. And you know what's in it. A model card for AI essentially helps you know what's in it. Like, how was the model trained? What kind of data was the model trained on? What are the indications? What are the limitations? What are the ingredients? Those are basic things that you as an end user, be a patient or a doctor, would want to know to help inform, should I use this tool on this patient, or should I, as a patient, have this used on me? That kind of base level minimum threshold of transparency is one of the big efforts that we launched at the end of last year, bringing consensus from the from the vendor side and the customer side was really important, because then now it sets the stage for this year for the adoption and utilization of that. And that kind of level setting, an agreement on what transparency looks like, I hope, and I'm really excited to see this, will be a process of how we build trust in the AI space for health. And in particular, as we're building that kind of trust out, as the customers, as doctors and nurses and patients trust these tools more, that's going to unlock the kinds of more consequential use cases for AI that we want, right? To truly help a person in a life or death situation, right? Because if you don't have that kind of transparency, as a doctor, I wouldn't want to use a model that I didn't know kind of how effective is it on a person like the person I have in front of me on death's bed. So we're really excited about the adoption and utilization of the model card or nutrition label and this project on human flourishing that we'll be launching there.
We're excited about it, and for everything that Chai will accomplish in 2025. So thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me here. Really appreciate it.